ever watched a horror movie that you were super excited for because you read the plot synopsis or watched the trailer and thought the idea of it was super cool, but then you actually watched the movie and it turned out to be pretty ass? So have I. And I'm sick of it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Sid Says. It's called that because I'm Sid and I'm saying things to you. And today I've decided to put my useless master's in screenwriting to good use by starting a new series on my channel where I rewrite horror movies that have a great premise but terrible execution. And today we are going to be rewriting Grace. Now, you've probably never heard of Grace because it's one of the most slow, boring, suspenseless horror movies I have ever seen in my life. And that's a damn shame because this movie, gay, and also feminist, but it falls short in many ways that I hope to fix. So here's how this is going to work. I'll start with a recap of the movie so everyone is caught up on how the original story goes. I'll get into my critiques about what I don't like about certain aspects and how I would change them. And lastly, I will pitch you my rewrite for the script, and you can tell me in the comments if I fixed this film or made it worse. So, without further ado, let's talk about Grace. The movie opens with our main character, Madeline, and her husband, Michael, banging it out in a passionless fashion. Fast forward to like 7-ish months later, and Madeline is preggers. She talks with her mother-in-law, Vivian, who wants Madeline to see a traditional OBGYN, but Madeline is very new age. She doesn't trust traditional medicine, she's holistic and vegan, and she has plans for a natural birth with a midwife. We find out later during a meeting with the midwife, Patricia, that Madeline's fear of traditional methods comes from two previous miscarriages she had that she blames on the doctors. We then get a scene of Madeline preparing raw meat for her man-child husband that still expects her to cook for him while heavily pregnant. And the process obviously disgusts her. There's also footage of a cow slaughter happening on TV while she's doing this. Bitch, turn that off. And to really drive the point home, her cat brings a bloody dead rat home. Excessive. Anyway, we learn through a conversation with Michael that Madeline and Patricia have history together. More on this later. Madeline gets chest pains and is taken to a traditional hospital against her will by her shitty husband. She's diagnosed with preeclampsia by the OBGYN that Vivian wanted her to see, Dr. Son, and is going to be induced at only 31 weeks, also against her will. Patricia shows up and calls Dr. Son out for his medical incompetence, proving that Madeline does not have preeclampsia and stops the induction. On the drive back home from the hospital, Madeline and Michael get into a car wreck because their shitty hybrid SUV's airbag goes off for no reason. This was foreshadowed earlier, but I think it's kind of ridiculous, so I'm gonna change the reason for the crash in my version. Anyway, shitty husband is dead, and so is Madeline's unborn baby. But Madeline still refuses to go to a traditional hospital for an induction, and instead chooses to carry to full term and have a natural birth just like she planned. Flash forward a little more and Madeline's water breaks, but it's super bloody and gross, and she has a really screamy and flaily water birth at Patricia's clinic. There's lots of blood and black goo and shaky camera work, but in the end, Madeline gets her prize, a dead daughter. Yay! Patricia and the nurses go through all the motions as if the baby is alive to make Madeline feel better, and it's honestly a pretty emotional scene and a well done scene, but alas, baby is still dead and full of black goo, and the team leaves Madeline alone to grieve. But then a miracle happens. Madeline begs her baby daughter to come back to life, and would you believe it? That baby listens. Hooray! She's alive and super normal. She's totally normal, and nothing is wrong with her. Ignore all that black goo. It's fine. Anyway, Madeline names her new normal daughter Grace and takes her home. Honestly, I really like the whole first act of this movie. I don't have many problems with it other than a few nitpicky things here and there, which is why it's such a shame that the rest of this movie becomes so unbearably boring and like really weird. I'm gonna get ahead of myself. You'll see. Vivian, the mother-in-law, calls Madeline and is really pushing for her to see the OBGYN Dr. Son and is also pushing for a visit, but Madeline keeps blowing her off. Patricia, the midwife, comes to visit and brings flowers. Ooh, she's making a move. Anyway, Madeline is still watching her animal torture videos. What the fuck is wrong with her? Patricia says some things that alludes to some history romantically between herself and Madeline. Ooh. Patricia tries to progress things further between them, but Madeline rejects her and Patricia leaves. Now is when some strangeness starts happening. Grace's hair begins to fall out and flies start to swarm around her and crawl up her nose and shit. She also starts to emit a stink and not the usual kind of baby stink.
Ew.
And during a little scrub-a-dub session, Grace starts bleeding into the water due to sores developing on her body. Madeline tries to call Patricia for help, but she can't reach her. And the flies are still swarming. What the fuck, Madeline? How do all these goddamn flies keep getting in your house? Close your freaking windows. Also, Grace has developed an intolerance for milk and keeps throwing that shit right back up. Meanwhile, Patricia is looking at RVs, thinking about getting away, and her little lesbian assistant is clearly jealous of Patricia and Madeline's past relationship, telling Patricia to just get over that shit. And we find out later that she's keeping Madeline and Patricia apart intentionally by rejecting all of Madeline's calls. But let's check back in with mother-in-law Vivian, who has gone full-blown crazy with grief over her son's death and is now trying to make herself lactate again by getting her husband to suck on her titties.
Ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine.
Yeah, this is the weird shit I was talking about. I'm gonna cut this from my version because what the fuck? Anyway, Madeline's nipples start bleeding. I don't know if that's like a normal thing that can happen after giving birth, but she doesn't seem too worried about it. She tries to breastfeed Grace again, but this time it works. But not because of the milk, because of the blood. And holy hell, that's a lot of blood. Ain't no way that's normal. Go to a doctor, bitch. She doesn't. Instead, she goes to the store to buy a shit ton of meat so she can squeeze the blood out of it and feed it to Grace. Does this bitch know you can go to the butcher shop and just like buy straight blood? What am I asking? She's dumb as hell. Of course she doesn't. But anyway, she feeds the beef blood to Grace, but it doesn't work, and Grace starts convulsing and throwing the blood up everywhere. Vivian goes to visit Dr. Son and convinces him to do a home visit on Madeline to prove that she's unfit to be a mother. And I have a lot of issues with this. Why go to your OBGYN instead of child services? She says it's because Grace will be sent to foster care instead of with her, which she doesn't want, but then says if she can get a doctor to prove that Madeline is an unfit mother, then she'll get custody of Grace. But that's not fucking true. Grace would go into foster care for a little bit either way while courts decided custody. And on top of this, she already knows Madeline doesn't trust traditional doctors. So even if she sends this guy to Madeline's house, what makes her think Madeline will let him in? And then the doctor says he'll do it if Vivian helps him get out of some trouble he got himself into, and she agrees without even asking what the trouble was. What if he's a sexual predator? What the fuck? And then, lo and behold, when the doctor goes to Madeline's house, she doesn't open the door. How fucking stupid is everyone in this goddamn movie? Holy shit. Anyway, Madeline goes back to feeding Grace her blood, which seems to be working wonders for Grace, but is making Madeline anemic.
Oh. All right.
Meanwhile, Vivian sends Dr. Son back to Madeline's house for round 2, while Vivian breaks out her old breast pump to get herself lactating again. What is with this freaky shit? Does she think being able to lactate will be brought up in the custody battle and help her cause? What the hell is going on? Anyway, the doctor shows up at Madeline's house and just invites himself in, and even though Madeline knows he's there to prove she's an unfit mother, she just lets him stick around anyway. Everyone in this movie is the dumbest bitch alive. Dr. Son does an exam on Madeline when he realizes she's badly anemic, and the way the scene is framed, I have no idea if they're trying to imply he's like a creep or if he's genuinely trying to help her. It's very strange. It's like that scene in American Psycho where they had Willem Dafoe do 3 different takes of the same scene with different emotions and then splice them together in the final cut. But for that movie, it made sense because it was supposed to be intentionally making it difficult to know what the character was feeling. But in this movie, it's just confusing because I have no idea what we would gain narratively by doing this. Anyway, Dr. Son hears Grace crying over the baby monitor and can tell by her fucked up, mangled baby noises that she's super sick. He runs upstairs to check on her, but Madeline stops him by smashing a vase on his head, and this kills him, I guess? She tries to call Dr. Son, but when she doesn't get an answer, she decides to go over to Madeline's house to investigate herself. While that's happening, Madeline cuts up the doctor to get all his blood out of him to feed to Grace. And while that's going down, Patricia finally realizes that her fuck-ass jealous assistant has been lying to her about Madeline not calling. So she also goes over to Madeline's house to check on her. Vivian arrives first and lets herself in. Some super boring, non-effective suspense building happens for a long-ass time, but eventually Eventually, Vivian makes her way into Grace's room and tries to kidnap her. Madeline tries to stop her and Vivian knocks her out with a hammer. When Vivian kneels down to check on her, Madeline wakes up and rips her throat out with her teeth. Pretty baller, actually. Patricia arrives just in time to see both Madeline and Vivian bleeding out on the floor while Grace suckles up the blood. We jump to some time later. Patricia and Madeline are living on the lam with two of the most fucked up cuts I've ever seen. But what's more fucked up is that Grace needs more than blood now. She needs flesh. And Madeline lifts up her shirt to show her shitty CGI Nana boobie. The end. If you haven't seen Grace for yourself, it's impossible to tell you in words just how insanely slow the pace of this movie is. Despite having an hour 20-minute runtime, it's an absolute slog to get through. Its incredibly sluggish pace makes it have no sense of urgency. You never feel as if anyone is running out of time or that they're in a rush to do something because clearly they aren't. And that completely ruins it as a horror film. There just isn't nearly enough happening in this film. So little happens. And I feel like there is very little escalation. The whole movie is supposed to be about the lengths a mother will go to protect her child, but I feel like Madeline does very little. I know this is gonna sound weird, but let me explain before you come for me. I feel like this movie needs to be more like Little Shop of Horrors, because in that show, it starts with Seymour feeding the plant his own blood, but when he can't sustain that anymore, he moves on to killing people to get the blood he needs. Madeline needs to do the same thing. I think she's far too passive as a protagonist. She needs to make the decision to go out and hunt people to feed her baby. And the kill count on this film needs to be much higher. Madeline's got to kill like at least 3 people, I feel. Another thing I want to address is this film's themes of female oppression under the patriarchy. Grace does a lot of heavy lifting to show Madeline being deliberately ignored by the men in the film, having her opinions and worries brushed aside. But I feel like this is kind of dropped after the first act. Even when Dr. Son comes back into the plot, it's left ambiguous if he's friend or foe. And the thing he said about being in a bit of trouble is left completely unaddressed when it could be a huge setup for him being an unambiguous villain. And speaking on how women are treated within the medical field, I think this film would hit a lot harder if Madeline was a Black or Native woman who are notoriously treated even worse by the medical system, especially when it comes to childbirth. And then there would be another layer of oppression and patriarchy with all these white people in her life saying that they know better than her. And when Madeline is interacting with a character that represents the patriarchy, I feel like the film doesn't push their interactions as far as they could. I think the scene in the hospital where she's almost induced against her will is the only time they hit this mark. But other than that, Dr. Son doesn't feel like a very big threat. Vivian, who upholds the patriarchy, doesn't feel like a very big threat. The medical system that Madeline fears doesn't feel like a very big threat, and Madeline's relationship with Michael doesn't feel like a threat at all. I also want to address Madeline being alone for the majority of the movie. If I'm going to look at this favorably, I think what the filmmaker might have been attempting to do was show how isolating motherhood can be when you have no support system. But I think this falls short. One, because Madeline does have a support system, she just chooses not to rely on them or is held back from reaching them through some contrived plot device. Two, because it causes all of the characters and their relationships to feel super underdeveloped. And three, Madeline's isolation and lack of interaction with other characters is what makes this movie so boring. Literally nothing is happening. And speaking on her lack of interaction and underdeveloped character relations, Madeline and Patricia need to have a lot more screen time together or otherwise more exploration of their past relationship. As it stands, their past relationship is pretty vague. It's mentioned they were friends from college and that they were most likely romantic partners at some point, but that's all we know. We don't know why their relationship ended. We don't know why Madeline decided to marry a man that she clearly isn't attracted to. We don't know why or how Madeline decided to reach back out to Patricia again after who knows how long to be her midwife. And when they sort of get back together at the end of the movie, it feels really unsatisfying because not only is the relationship underdeveloped, but we also only know how Patricia feels about Madeline and nothing about how Madeline feels about Patricia. The ending almost comes off as if Madeline only decided to go with Patricia for Grace's sake, which is really shitty. Overall, I want to explore more of Madeline's perspective. I want to expand on her distrust of the medical system. I want to dissect her relationships, and I want to give her more motive to why she wants to have a child so badly and why she's willing to go to the lengths she goes to for her daughter. But before we get into my rewrite, let's hear a quick word from this video sponsor. Me. That's right, me. Because YouTubers that talk about bad movies are a dime a dozen. But where else would you find a YouTuber who actually fixes them? And I heard if you subscribe to my channel, the worst movie you've ever seen will magically transform overnight into a much better movie. Or a zombie baby will show up in your house. I'm not quite sure. The genie I made a deal with was kind of vague. So if you want to make the worst movie you've ever seen actually watchable, or maybe have a zombie baby materialize in an unspecified location in your home, please give me a like and subscribe, and go check out my various social medias linked in the description below. Thank you. And back to the video. First big change I'm going to make is that Madeline will be written as a woman of color, most likely a Black or Native American woman whose health concerns are the most likely to be ignored by medical professionals, especially if those professionals are white and or male. I actually like how this movie starts with passionless sex. That sounds crazy out of context. Okay, but allow me to say something even crazier out of context. I think this movie should start with a montage of passionless sex and pregnancy complications. One of the tenets of visual storytelling is show, don't tell, and I think it would be a lot more impactful to see Madeline experiencing these past complications instead of just hearing about them. I also want some of the complications to be more traumatic than just vague miscarriages. I would add in some scenes where Madeline goes to the doctor during a past pregnancy complaining of abdominal pain or something, but they just write her off or don't take her pain seriously, therefore overlooking some major complication that leads to a miscarriage that could have been prevented with earlier intervention. And I think the doctor she goes to should be Dr. San, who was recommended to her by Vivian. There can even be a scene where Madeline says she doesn't want to see Dr. San again during her second pregnancy because of what happened last time, but Vivian completely overlooks her concerns because nothing ever bad happened to her when she was pregnant and went to Dr. San. But of course, Madeline still loses her second baby, also due to medical racism and sexism. And I think maybe she'll also have a near death experience too, where they ignore her pain and don't realize she's bleeding out or something. Vivian and Michael, of course, ignore Madeline's suggestion that Dr. San might be treating her differently due to her race because they've never seen him do anything like that. During Madeline's third pregnancy, she reaches out to Patricia out of desperation. She's embarrassed to come crawling back to her ex after a vague but very explosive breakup, but she knows Patricia is an experienced midwife who is also a woman of color, and she's the only person Madeline feels she can trust with her pregnancy. Patricia has some reservations about becoming Madeline's midwife considering their bad breakup, but she ends up agreeing since Madeline seems so worried about her baby. Madeline will still have the argument scene with Vivian, but I'm going to make it a lot more tense with Vivian really pushing her to go back to Dr. San, but Madeline puts her foot down and outright refuses to see that bitch ass doctor. And Michael, of course, takes his mother's side. I really want to ramp up Michael and Vivian's relationship so that it makes more sense why Vivian goes so ballistic later. I want her to have some real boy mom energy, and Michael will be way more of a man child than he already is. Maybe he doesn't just force his pregnant wife to cook for him, but he can also say some fuck ass shit like how Madeline doesn't cook as well as his mom does and that she needs to work on that. And obviously, Madeline is still forced to prepare and cook meat, which she finds disgusting, especially during her pregnancy. I also think Michael needs to be more threatening. I'm thinking he'll pick up more on Madeline and Patricia having some sort of history that was clearly more than friends, and then confronts Madeline about it and probably says something a little homophobic because, of course, he will. Madeline denies everything, which makes Michael mad, and I don't think he'd hit her or anything, but he'd definitely do something that's clearly not cool, like grab her by the arm way too hard. And then this is where Madeline starts having chest pains or some other kind of complication, like maybe she starts bleeding. But then I'll add a scene where Michael takes Madeline forcefully. Like he's saying he's not going to take her to some fuck ass woo woo lesbo holistic doctor and is taking her back to Dr. San. And Madeline is trying to fight him off and break free while he's shoving her into the car, begging him to take her to Patricia instead, but he doesn't listen and says Madeline is never going to see Patricia again. During the drive to the hospital, Michael and Madeline continue to physically fight. Madeline tries to call Patricia and Michael tries to take the phone from her hand, and during their struggle, Michael will lose control of the car and they crash, resulting in Michael and the baby's death. Patricia comes to visit Madeline in the hospital, where once again the doctors ignore her asking for more pain medication for her injuries. Patricia calls them out because she knows that they give higher doses to white patients with similar injuries, and the doctors relent. Patricia stays by Madeline's side during the remainder of her doomed pregnancy and her recovery in the hospital. I think here is where they'll have have a heart to heart and talk a little more about their past together. I'm thinking the reason they broke up is because Madeline was ready to have children, but Patricia didn't want to have any children, and their philosophies behind their reasons clashed. I'm thinking that Madeline either had really shitty parents that never cared about her, so she wants to have her own children to be the parent her parents never were, or if she's played by a native woman, perhaps she puts a lot of emphasis on legacy and wanting to have children so that her culture doesn't die out. Meanwhile, Patricia either also had shitty parents and or experienced a lot of racism and doesn't want to bring any of her own children into the world out of fear of generational trauma or exposing her potential children to the cruelty of the world. She'd rather focus her energy on helping other women of color bring their own children into the world if they so choose and offer them a medical alternative that is free of medical racism and sexism. Madeline's and Patricia's differing ideas around parenthood caused them to have a huge fight and break up. And during this time after the breakup, Madeline falls into a deep depression and seeks a way out of it. And here's something pretty different. I think that maybe Madeline goes to seek therapy, but doesn't have the money to go to a real therapist and has to go to some kind of free therapy session that's offered by a local church. But of course, the church is homophobic and says the reason she was so unhappy is because she was in a lesbian relationship and that she'll only be able to find true happiness in a traditional marriage. And who else attends this church other than Vivian and Michael? And that's the story behind how they meet. I know this addition might seem a little out of nowhere, but I wanted there to be more of an explanation around why Madeline would break up with Patricia and then enter a loveless marriage with a man. Of course, Madeline could be bi, but considering how she behaves around Michael, I think it's more likely that she is a lesbian that felt pressured into a hetero marriage. And who better to pressure you into a hetero marriage than the church? And I think this also adds another layer of patriarchy because come on, who upholds the patriarchy more than religion? Anyway, while Patricia and Madeline are healing their relationship in the face of hopelessness and despair, Vivian is having a real rough go of it. She has a full blown mental breakdown after learning her son is dead. I'm talking screaming, crying, falling to her knees, throwing shit, the works. It's very clear that Michael was her whole world and she cannot handle his death in a healthy way. But we'll fast forward a little in time to Madeline's water breaking. Like I mentioned earlier, I actually really like the whole sequence of Madeline's birth, and I don't think I would change anything about it, which is awesome because that saves some work for me. Anyway, in the original movie, Vivian mentions pretty late into the film that Madeline told her that the baby had died, only for her to find out later that the baby was still alive, but it's never showed or explained how Vivian learned about this. So I'm going to add some scenes here to show that. I like the idea of a church scene. Maybe it's Michael's funeral. Everyone is wishing Vivian condolences and asking about Madeline, and she admits that she hasn't actually gone to see Madeline since the accident. People give her judgmental church looks, you know the kind, and that prompts her to go visit Madeline. When she goes to see her, the first thing she notices is that Madeline's pregnant belly is gone. She makes some comments asking about how the procedure went and how she's feeling. Madeline is vague and clearly trying to rush Vivian away, and just when she's about to shut the door, Grace starts crying. Vivian starts freaking out and accusing Madeline of falsely telling her the baby died and trying to force her way into the house. Madeline doesn't really have a way to explain herself, so she just tells Vivian that Grace was a miracle. This calms Vivian down a bit, but she still demands to see Grace. Madeline tells her that Grace is still really fragile right now and Vivian can't see her. Vivian begs Madeline to go see Dr. Son, but Madeline firmly tells her no before saying that she'll call Vivian when she's able to see Grace and closes the door on her face. Later that night, Patricia comes over for something that looks suspiciously like a dinner date. She even brings flowers for Madeline. They'll eat dinner together like a family, looking at each other with love and adoration, and after they put Grace to sleep for the night together, looking like a picturesque depiction of familial bliss, Patricia will go in for a kiss and Madeline will reject her. Patricia will apologize for trying to rush things, but Madeline will tell her that she and Patricia can never be together because they're both women. Maybe she'll even imply that what they had was never love, but only lust, and that they lived in sin. This, of course, will cause another fight and Patricia will storm out. And now the main event begins. I think I'm going to keep the main sequence of events leading up to the reveal that Grace craves human blood because I don't really see anything wrong with it. I'll probably just have less flies because why the fuck were there so many goddamn flies in Madeline's house? That shit was crazy. Anyway, I think I'll have Madeline consider calling Patricia for help, but deciding against it and instead doing research on other holistic clinics in the area, but having no luck because none of them are taking new patients and instead suggesting she go to urgent care, which of course she won't do. Meanwhile, Grace is getting worse. I think she should show more signs of obvious rotting, like a real zombie would do. But while all of that is going down, I think Vivian will be going to church and praying and saying shit like God gifted her a living granddaughter in exchange for losing her son, which is proof she deserves to be in Grace's life, but Madeline still refuses to let her come over. Vivian starts sticking at the house, hoping to catch a glimpse of Grace, but ends up just hearing Grace cry for days on end. And this will be the catalyst for her trying to gain custody of Grace. And in my version, she's not going to go to Dr. Son because that's stupid as hell. She'll go to CPS and they'll agree to send an agent over to check on Grace. And just a little bit of a side note here, but in the original movie, there's a very quick moment where Dr. Son calls Vivian Your Honor, implying that she's a judge. This is never mentioned before or after, but I guess it's supposed to justify why he asked her for help getting out of some legal trouble. Anyway, she's going to be very overtly a judge in my version, and she'll use that leverage to escalate the CPS case. Anyway, I did some research and discovered that it is not, in fact, normal for your nipples to bleed after pregnancy, especially to the extent that Madeline is bleeding in this movie. But I think I can write this off by Madeline reacting like she knows it's bad, but still being too stubborn to call Patricia or go to a normal hospital. But this is where we'll have a scene where Madeline realizes that Grace needs blood to live. And they kind of have this element in the original movie, but I do want to make it more noticeable in my version that consuming blood heals or reverses Grace's decay. And I want this to be nasty. Like you can see her ribs because her skin's rotted off, and then the sinew and tissue just weaves back together in front of Madeline's eyes as she feeds her baby. And so it's unequivocal proof that Grace needs blood to live. And I like the scene where she goes to the store to get loads of meat to feed to Grace, but I want it to be bigger. Instead of shambling around the store and slowly looking at the meat and slowly realizing that that's what she should do, I think Madeline should be busting into the store wild eyed and disheveled, booking it to the meat section and loading her arms up with as much meat as she can carry, and then just dumping it on the conveyor belt and yelling, "How much?" And the freaked out cashier is like, this is gonna be like $300. And Madeline just whips out her credit card and is like, take it, take it. And then she just scoops up all her meat and scurries out of the store, and everyone is just standing there wondering what the fuck they just saw. In short, urgency. We need urgency. But other than some much needed urgency, the scene with her squeezing the meat and giving the blood to Grace will basically be the same. But before Grace starts showing any symptoms of rejecting the blood, the doorbell rings. It's CPS. Madeline doesn't want to let the CPS agent in, but he makes it seem like she has to, even though that's not true. And CPS can't enter your house without your permission unless they have a warrant from the police. Just a little fun fact there. So Madeline reluctantly invites him in. At first, everything seems to be going well. Grace looks healthy, the house looks well kept, and nothing seems to be out of the ordinary. The CPS agent is about to leave when Grace starts convulsing and then throws up blood all over the CPS agent. He runs into the kitchen to wash himself off and sees all the meat on the counters. He comes to the conclusion that Madeline has been feeding Grace blood and takes out his phone to call the police or home office or whoever CPS agents call when they encounter a fucked up case that needs immediate attention. But before he can make the call, Madeline grabs the knife she used to carve up the meat and stabs him before she can even think about what she's doing. After she realizes what she's done, she starts to panic, thinking about what she'll do with the body. But then Grace starts to cry, and Madeline realizes what she has to do. She carves up the agent's body, squeezing all the blood out of it, putting the excess blood in the freezer and throwing the discarded body parts in her compost bin outside. She feeds Grace the blood and she quickly recovers. Vivian goes back to the CPS office after a few days of no word, and they tell her that the CPS agent they sent over went missing. His car was found abandoned on the side of the road. Vivian doesn't give a shit about the CPS agent disappearing. She just demands they send another agent over. They tell her that they can't since one just visited and recommended that Vivian collect evidence of neglect on her own since proof proof would escalate the case. Vivian calls Madeline, trying to act like she knows nothing about the CPS visit and asking when she can see Grace. Madeline calls her out and says she knows CPS showed up because of her and says Vivian will never see Grace in her whole life. Vivian goes back to the church to pray and ask God for guidance because she knows it's his plan for Grace to live with her. Time passes and Madeline starts to run out of CPS agent blood. She starts feeding Grace her own blood again, but quickly realizes that she can't keep this up for long without bleeding herself dry. While she's looking through drawers trying to find some iron supplements, she finds one of Dr. Son's old business cards, and she has her plan figured out. She calls Dr. Son under the guise of wanting him to make a house visit to check on her bleeding nipples because that's clearly not normal. Madeline asks Dr. Son to keep his visit a secret for ego reasons, and he agrees. But he's a fucking liar because he'll immediately call Vivian and be like, "Guess who just made a house call?" Vivian tells him that when he visits, even if he sees no actual signs of neglect, that he should make something up so CPS will take Grace out of Madeline's custody. Dr. Son agrees on the condition that Vivian will help him out of an upcoming court case where he's been accused of abusing his power as a physician. Vivian agrees. Madeline waits for Dr. Son to arrive and hears a knock at the door. She opens it, but it's not Dr. Son. It's Patricia. She's come because she wants to talk things out with Madeline and not leave things sour between them like last time. Madeline is open to this, but quickly changes tune when she sees Dr. Son's car coming down the road. She yells at Patricia to get the hell away from her house and slams the door in her face. Patricia goes back to her car, but stays, watching Madeline's house. Dr. Son arrives and Madeline invites him in. She plays along with the exam for a little while, where he's obviously creeping on her and touching her more than necessary. He'll say some shit about how since he's doing a favor for her, that he expects a favor in return and tries to make a move on her. And she'll respond by stabbing him in the neck and spitting on him. Fuck that guy. She'll do her usual chopping up, bloodletting, and body parts in the compost routine before taking Dr. Son's car keys and moving his car. Patricia watches this in confusion. A couple more days pass, and after not being able to reach Dr. Son over the phone, Vivian goes to his office where the receptionist tells her that Dr. Son has gone missing and his car was found abandoned on the side of the road. A familiar MO. Vivian goes to the police because she's convinced that Madeline has killed the CPS agent and Dr. Son. The police think it's laughable to accuse a woman of murdering a man, let alone two men, but Vivian once again leverages her position as a judge to get them to bring Madeline in for questioning. Patricia calls Madeline and tries to get her to explain what's going on and why she saw Madeline drive off in the doctor's car, but Madeline just tells her to leave her alone and to never come near her again. But this doesn't sit right with Patricia, and she decides to head over. In the meantime, a police officer arrives and tries to arrest Madeline, but she fights back and runs into her house. He follows her inside and they get into a physical fight where it seems like the officer is more intent on getting revenge on her rather than simply subduing her. Because duh, he's a cop. But Madeline eventually gets the upper hand and kills the officer. She has a momentary feeling of triumph before realizing that she won't be able to cover up this murder as easily as the others, especially when his radio starts going off asking for an update. Madeline starts frantically packing her things and getting Grace ready to leave so they can flee. At the same time, Vivian arrives and watches from across the street, thinking the police will exit with Madeline in handcuffs at any minute and she can swoop in to take Grace into her custody. But after a few minutes of waiting, she gets impatient and goes to the front door, which she finds locked. She goes around to the gate to the backyard, which is also locked, but much easier to jimmy open. She walks in through the back door and into the kitchen where she sees the dead police officer. She runs back outside and accidentally knocks over the compost bin, revealing the decaying bodies of the CPS agent and Dr. Son. She goes back into the house to grab the officer's gun and hears Madeline upstairs, where she goes to investigate. She finds Grace in her crib and takes her, but she runs into Madeline in the hallway. She points the gun at Madeline and says she's taking Grace, claiming that it's God's will. Madeline goes to attack her and Vivian flees down the stairs. Madeline rushes after her and jumps onto Vivian's back, clawing and trying to bite her like a wild animal. During the struggle, Vivian fires the gun and shoots Madeline, who collapses to the floor. And much like in the original film, when Vivian kneels down to check on her, Madeline bites her throat out. But I want my version to be a lot more gory. While Madeline and Vivian bleed out, Patricia finally arrives and, seeing the police car parked in front, rushes inside where she finds Grace lapping up the blood on the floor. We jump forward in time to see Patricia scantily clad and standing outside a dive bar. A man comes up to solicit her and she tells him to follow her back to her RV. Once inside, she leads him to the bedroom, but before he has the chance to touch her, Madeline emerges from behind him and whacks him on the head with a baseball bat, striking him more times than strictly necessary. Patricia looks disgusted and frightened, but Nevertheless, helps Madeline calm down by reminding her that they need to feed Grace. Together, they dissect the man and drain his blood into a bottle. But when Madeline tries to feed Grace, she refuses the bottle and instead reaches towards the man's corpse. Madeline cuts off a piece of his flesh, gives it to Grace, and she eats it. Madeline announces they'll need to make more room in the freezer while she takes the knife and chops the man into smaller pieces. No semblance of any disgust or remorse on her face. And that's my version of Grace. Did you like it? Do you think I made the film better? Do you think my master's degree was a waste of time and money? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, if you subscribe, the worst movie you've ever seen will magically transform into a much better movie, or a zombie baby will show up in an unspecified location in your house. But if potentially getting your nipples sucked bloody by a monster baby isn't your idea of a good time, don't even worry about it. Bye.